presence of Africans in Asia is a topic that has been largely overlooked in academic research and educational programs. While the cultural contributions of Africans in Asia remain underexplored, there are intriguing historical links, such as the evidence that Sakanue no Tamuramaro, a celebrated samurai from Japan who lived around 758 to 811 AD, was of African descent. Historical evidence proving Tamuramaro as being black challenges common stereotypes, showing that black individuals in ancient Japan may not have been solely associated with servitude or submission. In China, African presence can be traced as far back as the Tang dynasty. Are the Chinese aware of black presence in China during antiquity? This is an exploration into the origins and history of the African presence in Asia. While many assume that Africans arrived in Asia primarily through the slave trade, it is worth noting that there were free migrations of Africans before this era. Research suggests that modern humans first emerged in Africa around 100,000 years ago. Between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, significant migrations took place, with some groups moving across South Asia, through areas like Sunderland and New Guinea, eventually reaching Australia. Later migrations spread from Western Asia to Europe, Northern Eurasia, and the Americas. Some scholars believe that people of African origin were the original inhabitants of regions like the Persian Gulf and the Makran coast, which were on the early migration routes out of Africa. Archaeological research supports these early African migrations and their influence on these areas. It is the year 820 AD, and Al-Jahiz, a young man of East African descent and in his early 40s, is rapidly gaining recognition in the bustling city of Basra, part of the Abbasid Caliphate. Al-Jahiz's writings also address social issues, including the dynamics of race and class in the Islamic world. In his famous work, The Glory of the Black Race, Fakhr al-Sudan, he defended the capabilities and achievements of black people, countering the negative stereotypes that were already prevalent at the time. The Ethiopians, the Berbers, the Copts, the Nubians, the Zaghawa, the Moors, the people of Sind, the Hindus, the Khmer, the Daliba, the Chinese, and those from beyond, the islands of the seas, are full of blacks as far as Hindustan and China. The Qafzeh-Skhul, found in present-day Israel, represents one of the earliest known modern humans, Homo sapiens, to have inhabited Asia. Discovered in the Qafzeh cave near Nazareth, this skull, along with other remains, dates back approximately 90,000 to 120,000 years. These fossils are part of a group known as the Qafzeh-Skhul hominins, which are considered some of the oldest anatomically modern humans found outside Africa. These remains provide evidence of Homo sapiens leaving Africa and moving into the Levant, Eastern Mediterranean region, making it the earliest record of modern humans in Asia. The skull exhibits typical physical features of the black Africans, such as prognathism. The Qafzeh-Skhul is crucial for understanding the spread of Homo sapiens out of Africa and how our species began to populate new regions of the world. The term Zalmat Gadu, meaning people of the blackheads, is how the ancient Sumerians referred to themselves. The Sumerians, who lived in present-day Iraq, are considered one of the earliest known civilizations, predating the arrival of lighter-skinned populations. According to some historical interpretations, the Sumerians were of African descent, and it was this group of black people who laid the foundations for the kingdoms of Sumer and Babylon. As the region developed, new groups such as the Akkadians and Assyrians, who were lighter-skinned, entered the scene and began to assert dominance over the original black-headed Sumerians. Under the leadership of figures like Sargon of Akkad, the Akkadians eventually absorbed the Sumerian civilization. Later, the Assyrians emerged as a powerful empire, continuing this process of cultural and political dominance over the people who originally founded these early Mesopotamian civilizations. For instance, Sargon I of Babylon, who ruled 3,800 years before the Christian era, gave himself the title of Sovereign of the Black-Headed People, among other titles such as King of Akkad and Sumer, etc. In a tablet where he recounts his life, Sargon boasts of having subdued this black people. The cuneiform text states, "When a king who succeeds me in the future governs, like me, the black-headed people." On another tablet, This black race reappears concerning an offense committed against the god Anu, and it is recounted that this god, seeking revenge, threatened to incite the black-headed people against those who wronged him. 3,000 years after Sargon, a Babylonian king, Merodach-Baladan II, who ruled as late as the 700 BCE, still titled himself King of the Black-Headed People. Then Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria in the 7th century BCE, also called himself the dominator of the black-headed people. Another king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, around 500 BCE, when speaking of this same people, expressed the hope that his descendants could always rule the black-headed people. In present-day Iran, the ancient Elamites once thrived. French archaeologist Marcel Auguste Dieulafoy, who helped uncover Elamite remains in the early 20th century, made some remarkable observations. He described sculptures of Elamite kings adorned in luxurious garments, covered in jewels and animal skins, similar to attire found in parts of Africa, and noted that their skin was black. Based on these findings, Dieulafoy concluded that there is the greatest probability that Elam was ruled by a black dynasty. Additionally, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, visited the region in the 5th century BC and described the presence of black people with straight hair. Over time, migrations of lighter-skinned populations from Eurasia into the region led to the blending of these black peoples through intermarriage, gradually altering the region's demographic makeup. The idea that the first inhabitants of India were black people is supported by visible evidence and historical accounts. These black populations, thought to be of Egyptian Sudanese origin, played a key role in the founding of the Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between present-day Pakistan and India around 2200 BC, making it the first monumental civilization in Asia. Greek historian Diodorus Siculus suggests that Osiris, a divine figure in Egyptian mythology, traveled from Ethiopia, ancient Sudan, to India. This reinforces the idea of early connections between Africa and India. The arrival of lighter-skinned populations in the region, often referred to as Aryans, is well documented. Around 1420 BC, a massive volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini in the Mediterranean caused widespread environmental disasters, including tsunamis. These events likely contributed to myths like the biblical flood and Atlantis. In the aftermath, Aryan groups migrated to India, Pakistan, conquering and ultimately ending the Indus Valley civilization. The 4th century Italian scholar Eusebius records that during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, black populations from the Indus Valley fled to Egypt, likely escaping the Aryan invasion. This migration occurred shortly after the Santorini explosion, connecting these events to the collapse of black civilization in the Indus Valley. A genetic study conducted by Fudan University and published in 2005 revealed that the first people to populate southern China were black people who migrated from Africa around 100,000 years ago. Today, the Nakis, an indigenous black group, still exist in southern China. However, many of these early black populations were likely absorbed through interbreeding with Mongol-descended groups from the north. Early Chinese skeletal remains, particularly from 6000 to 4000 BCE, show traits similar to black people of Oceania, suggesting that the first people in China were likely black, resembling the Batwa of Central Africa and the Andaman Islanders. These early populations, often derogatively referred to as black dwarfs by Chinese historians, survived well into historical periods. These so-called diminutive Africoids, also referred to as negritos, were found not only in China, but also in other parts of Asia, such as the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Chinese records from as recent as the Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1911, even mention these little black people in Taiwan, describing them as broad-nosed, dark-skinned, and curly-haired. The influence of Africans in early Chinese civilization is evident, particularly during the Shang, 1766 to 1027 BCE, Tang, and Yuan dynasties. The Shang dynasty, China's first, had such a prominent black presence that they were described as having black and oily skin, Artifacts like the bronze vessel Le Tigresse from this period display Africoid features. In the Tang dynasty, statues of black dancers with spiral hair have been found in museums, suggesting that black individuals played a role in Chinese society. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, a descendant of the famous Genghis Khan, also depicted black individuals in notable artworks, portraying them as powerful figures, possibly nobles or high officials. Lao Tse, the famous Chinese philosopher, was also traditionally described as having a black complexion, worshipped for his wisdom. French anthropologist H. Imbert noted that in the early periods of Chinese history, the Negrito people inhabited the entire southern region of the country. Similarly, Prince Liu Nan, who passed away in 122 BC, mentioned a kingdom of small black people in southwestern China. Chinese academic professor Chang Xinglang also confirmed the presence of black people with frizzy hair in southern China during the early centuries of the Christian era. The regions we now know as Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia were originally inhabited by black populations. These early black communities, often referred to as Negritos, were the first to spread out from this area, with some migrating to Australia around 50,000 years ago. The Negritos played a key role in shaping many of the early civilizations in Southeast Asia. They practiced a matrilineal system of royal succession, where leadership passed through the mother's line, a tradition common in many black cultures. Over time, these populations were partly absorbed through intermarriage with Mongol-descended groups that migrated into the region. In his 1911 book, Prehistoric Japan, Professor Neil Gordon Munro, a leading expert on Japan, stated that the Japanese are a mix of several distinct groups, including black and Mongol ancestries. The first known people to inhabit the Japanese islands were the Ainu, a group whose name may suggest a connection to Africa. Scholar Batchelor described the Ainu as having frizzy hair and thick lips, features commonly associated with African populations. A Japanese proverb even reflects this idea, saying, "For a samurai to be brave, he must have a little black blood." Although Japan is often thought of as having a homogeneous population, evidence suggests that black people played a significant role in its history, particularly in early periods up to the 9th century. One key discovery came in 1986, when archaeologists unearthed the remains of an ancient Stone Age hut near Osaka. This structure, dating back 22,000 years, was said to resemble African bushmen's dwellings, highlighting the early presence of black people in Japan. Anthropologists like Roland B. Dixon noted that the earliest populations of Japan were a mix of Proto-Australoid and Proto-Negroid types, with physical characteristics that can still be seen in some of the population today. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, a prominent African scholar, also pointed out that some Japanese scientists believe the yellow race, which includes the Japanese, may have resulted from the interbreeding of black and white people in a colder climate. One of the most significant figures in early Japanese history was Sakanuye no Tamuramaro, a black warrior who became a prominent general and the first person to hold the title of Sei Tai Shogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo. Tamuramaro is often described as a paragon of military virtues and was instrumental in subjugating the Ainu in northern Japan. His influence is still remembered, and his contributions to Japan's military history are seen as foundational to the rise of the samurai class. In various historical accounts, including works by prominent scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, and Joel Augustus Rogers, Tamuramaro's African heritage and his significant role in Japanese history have been highlighted, though these aspects are often overlooked in mainstream historical narratives. Despite these discussions, most mainstream historical records focus primarily on Tamuramaro's military career and contributions to the Japanese state, rather than delving deeply into claims of African heritage. His legacy continues to be honored in Japan, particularly at his tomb in Kyoto, where he is remembered for his contributions to early Japanese history and the founding of the Kiyomizu-dera Temple. Despite the frequent erasure or downplaying of African contributions to Japan's development, the evidence points to a rich and important African influence in not only Japan but Greater Asia. In conclusion, the Black presence in regions outside Africa, whether in Asia, Europe, or the Americas, is not a modern invention or an Afrocentric reinterpretation of history. It is a well-documented and undeniable fact supported by historical evidence. From the African descendants in early Japan, such as the legendary Sakanua no Tamuramaro, to the significant African populations that lived in ancient China and beyond, these stories are part of the broader narrative of human migration and global interaction. The historical contributions of Black people to various civilizations demonstrate a rich, interconnected past that transcends geographical borders. This history deserves to be recognized and studied not as a fringe theory, but as an integral part of our global heritage.